What's up, guys? Welcome back to Probing Paul. This is episode number 42, my monthly Q&A. I answer your tech questions or any other random stuff that you happen to ask. All the questions from this month's video were asked in last month's video, so feel free to leave comments if you want me to answer them next month in December. Also, here are all the other Probing Pauls. There's a playlist if you want to go back and watch the old ones. I feel like you could jump down in this hole and somehow travel back in time if you really put your mind to it, but maybe I'll figure that out in a future episode. Before I get into the Q&A, a quick announcement. On December 7th, we're going to be doing a 12-hour charity live stream from right here in my Paul's Hardware Studios. Going to be streaming with Kyle, aka Bitwit, and we're planning to go from about 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. local time, Pacific Standard Time. So join us if you can. We're going to be playing some games, we're going to have some giveaway PCs, and we're going to be raising money for charity. So that should be lots of fun. First question for this month, though, comes from Fat Fab. He says, "Hey Paul, when did you build your first system, and did it run DOS or Windows?" There are two systems that come to mind when I think about my earliest computers, and that's not even including the really early stuff like Commodore 64. But the first computer that we had ran Windows 3.1. It was about 1994, and it was based on an Intel 486DX2 processor, which you can pull up the specs for over on CPU World here. Now, this processor actually launched in August 92, so I'm not 100% sure that it was this exact specific SKU or not. It had 8 kilobytes of cache. It supported up to 4 gigabytes of physical memory, which was way more than anyone actually had to install at that point. And look, they've even got a performance comparison here where you can tell that it was a much better choice than going with something like the 486 SX2. The SX2-50 was a piece of crap, that one. And you can even see some variations of it here, just the bare chip by itself. Some of them shipped with a heatsink, which was apparently enough to cool that back then without the active cooling requirements. I can't say that was a system that I built, though. It was an HP machine that I think was one of those beige box that sat flat and you put your CRT monitor on top of it. The first system I actually built was a few years later in 1999. I used this system in college and I got it from Fry's. It was a Fry's pre-built system. It was a beige box. It had a turquoise flap on the front that could flap down so you could access your optical drive, and it was based on an AMD platform. So that was the AMD K62450. This was priced at $203 at its introduction, which was back in February of 1999. Upgrades to a 32 kilobyte cache. You can still do up to 4 gigs of memory. And you might look at that clock multiplier and be like, oh, is this running at 4.5 gigahertz? No, it was not. It was running at 450 megahertz. That is the frequency based on how computers worked back then, which I'm not even going to get into. Here again, some performance numbers. As you can see, it didn't have quite the chops to compete with Intel's Celeron 300, although it was a decent upgrade from the K6 400 megahertz. Here's an actual picture of the chip, and I never got down this far because, again, this was when I was buying a pre-built. So it came with the motherboard already installed and set up. All I had to do was add, I think, memory and some storage in there. Here it is with the heat spreader removed, and I never got that far along at this point in my PC building experience. The main thing I remember about that system is Fry's shipped it with the clear CMOS jumper on the motherboard in the clear position, which meant the system wouldn't boot up. So when I first got it set up, I wasn't able to get it functional. I had to return it and get a new one. When I got the new one and the same thing happened, it made me dig a little bit deeper, and that's where I discovered how clear CMOS jumpers worked. Next question, though, from Sage Morris. He says, "Hey Paul, I love your videos. I have a question for you." Thank you for loving my videos, by the way. When I'm looking at Hardware Info 64 for temperatures, should I be looking at the CPU temp or the CPU package temp? Thanks for all your amazing videos and keep it up. Thank you very much, Sage. And this is a good question and one that doesn't necessarily have a very direct answer. So I'm going to try to give you as much info as I possibly can, and I'm going to do so with the aid of Hardware Info 64 itself. Now, I apologize if these numbers are very small, but the CPU on the system I'm using right now is the Core i7-6950X, which is a 10-core processor. Now, when you're looking at these charts on Hardware Info 64, it pulls up a lot of data for you. And bear in mind that if you're looking at specific stuff like up here, you're looking at these sensors and the information being pulled directly from the CPU, here and here. Now, if you move over here, you'll notice that the motherboard is also providing data. It has separate sensors and everything. So the X99 Deluxe 2 that this is based on also has a set of temperatures there as well. I tend to lean towards the CPU temperatures versus the motherboard sensors, but you can use them to sort of reality check. Just bear in mind, you're probably dealing with sensors that aren't in the same place. The motherboard probably has a sensor on the socket that's as close to the CPU as it can get, whereas the CPU has sensors on each individual core, and then there might be other sensors within the package. So if you're talking about package temperatures, that's usually the hottest sensor within the CPU package, which might not necessarily be the actual core sensors. You also have a core max listing here, and that is basically looking at the maximum value from any of the individual cores and just showing it there, because a lot of times that's what you're looking for, and rather than scanning down 8 cores or 10 cores or whatever like that, you can just look at the core max values. Now, because the CPU package temperatures tend to vary from chip to chip, and especially if you're going from AMD to Intel, for example, what I tend to look at are the core temperatures themselves, the individual core temperatures. If I'm doing a stress test, for example, I will start the stress test, I will refresh the values here on Hardware Info 64, and then I will allow it to accumulate the average of all of the cores, and then I will average the average of all of the averages in order to get the average temperature. There's obviously a lot more that could be said about this, but be too detailed, I think, for my quick Q&A video, but hopefully that helps you out a little bit. The only other thing to point out would be that if you're using AMD versus Intel, you might see separate information. AMD, for example, has a T control or a temperature control value for like their second and first gen Ryzen stuff, which is sort of the faux value that AMD puts there to run the fans at higher speeds in order to get better performance. For AMD, I usually look at the T die temperature. That's the actual measured temperature on the die. And then here you should also bear in mind that if you're going for higher end AMD stuff like a 3900X or 3950X or the Threadrippers, they have multiple dies. So you'll see multiple sensors, multiple temperature readouts for each die. And in that case, I just tend to look at the hottest one. Next question here from Miguel Almeida, who says, will the Trident Z Neo, optimized for AMD memory, work with Intel builds? Can't seem to find the answer anywhere online. Short answer here is yes. If you're talking about memory compatibility, the main things you need to look for are just the version of memory it is, and right now we're using DDR4 for pretty much everything. So if you get a standard desktop DDR4 memory module, it's got the pin layout you need and the physical form layout that you need, and it can slot in, and just about any DDR4 memory you'll be able to plug in and run at the base frequency for whatever platform, and depending on the platform that you install it on, they have different base frequencies. That said, over time, for various purposes, usually marketing or to help out people who might be confused about the actual use for specific memory kits, you have had memory kits over time that have been advertised in different ways. G-Skill, for example, likes to put this compatible with Ryzen sticker on a lot of the memory module kits, and that's just to indicate that the actual chips that the memory is made out of tend to be the ones that are more compatible with Ryzen, because since AMD has come out with Ryzen, Ryzen likes faster memory, but not all faster memory can just plug in and work with Ryzen, because not all memory is put together in exactly the same way. So again, the simple answer to your question is just because it says compatible with Ryzen doesn't mean it's not compatible with Intel. Likewise, Intel, when they first came out with like triple channel and quad channel memory configurations on their high-end desktop series, you had a lot of memory kits that were launched that would have stuff like an Intel logo on it, which this kit also has. It's got an Intel logo down here in the corner and a Ryzen logo right there. It's compatible with both. They're just trying to tell you that if you buy this kit and you happen to have that specific platform, there maybe is a better chance for cross-compatibility there, but all of the Trident Z Neo stuff is really good memory, and you can plug it into an Intel platform and it will work just fine. Next question here from Rhoda Santiago. Hey Paul, do I need to remove the stickers from an M.2 drive before installing thermal pads for aftermarket heat sinks and or under motherboard armor/coolers? I like your very thorough question there. So what we're talking about here is little M.2 NVMe drives like this one. There's a lot of them, and they do tend to get hot. But one thing you should know about the NAND, the actual memory chips on an NVMe drive, is they actually like to run hot. You don't necessarily need to worry about keeping the NAND really cool. But the controller, because most of these will have a separate controller chip on them, does like to stay cool. So for that reason, it is still usually worth your while to go ahead and use an M.2 heatsink if you have one available, just to keep things a little bit cooler than they might be otherwise. That said, most of these little M.2 drives do have a sticker of some sort, one kind or another on them, like Corsair's Force series or the Samsung 960 series or 970 series, just a sticker that goes over the top. So to put your mind at ease, every major manufacturer of little M.2 NVMe drives like this that I have talked to has said that the stickers that they use are actually thermally conductive. You don't need to worry about removing them. You can just put your heatsink right on top of it. Heat goes through the sticker and up into your heatsink, and you should be just fine. So don't worry about pulling the sticker off. I'd say worry a little bit more about having some airflow going across it, because a heatsink will help, but if you don't have just a tiny bit of airflow to help evacuate some of that residual heat, then it's not going to be very effective. Got a few more questions that have rolled in. So from Shyster112, hey Paul, where you work from home, how do you handle keeping focused, balancing home life, and handling possible burnout? This is a good question. Actually, I'd say for the first year, maybe 2 years that I worked from home, probably one of the things that I struggled with the most. And that's because I can be lazy for sometimes. It's really nice to be like, oh, I'm just gonna hang out and do whatever I want to do today. And when it's completely up to you to motivate yourself to get stuff done, then you have to sort of change your mindset. And it took me a little while to get around to doing that. That wasn't to say I didn't do any work in the first year or two that I was working from home. Just in retrospect, I feel like I probably could have done more and worked a little bit harder. That said, for me, I think it helps that I'm kind of a homebody type person, I guess, as it's called. I like being home. I'm comfortable here. When it comes to work-life balance, it's just something that I have to kind of constantly remind myself of, even if there's still work to be done, and there's always still going to be more work to be done, especially on a YouTube channel. You're always going to have more videos coming up that could have work done. At a certain point, you just have to be like, all right, I've done enough for today. I need to give myself the thumbs up. You're good. You did some hard work today. Take a step aside, spend some time with the family, relax and watch some TV, eat some delicious food, drink some wine, paint a picture. I never get that far. I never actually get as far as painting a picture, but I think that is what helps handle the burnout, is not being so driven that I feel like I need to get work done all the time. And I think if I might pat myself on the back a little bit, that's something that I've gotten pretty good at, is allowing myself to have the free time to relax and decompress, and then actually working hard and getting a lot of work done when it is time to do work. Here's a question from Villico3. This is a question that's, I will say, fairly simple when it comes to the direct answer, but I wanted to respond to it to give a shout out to a special piece of software. He's asking, how can you easily tell what type of motherboard you're looking at, whether it's AMD or Intel? He also added by the model, and sometimes you can just tell if you look at the model motherboard, whether it's AMD or Intel, if you're familiar with the chipsets, because usually a motherboard will have the chipset name integrated into the name of the motherboard somehow, unless you're Asus, and then you just call it like Rampage 6 Extreme, and you hope that people know what that means. And I guess if you're just looking at a motherboard, the model names and everything aside, it is relatively easy to distinguish between them right now, at least if you're talking about the mainstream platforms, because AMD for quite some time has been using their AM4 socket, which is a PGA socket, so the pins are on the CPU, not on the motherboard, and the sockets all look roughly the same, and they're actually nice because you can touch them and you don't have to worry about damaging them or anything like that. This is an AM2/AM3 socket, for example, but it still looks roughly the same as AMD's current AM4 lineup. If you're looking at an Intel mainstream motherboard, they use LGA, which means that the pins are on the socket side, not on the CPU. This has a CPU installed, so you can't see those pins, but if you know the difference between an LGA and a PGA socket, then that can be a pretty quick visual indicator of whether you're dealing with an AMD or an Intel motherboard. But I do think a lot of you guys are probably familiar with that already, so I just wanted to give a quick shout out to CPU-Z, the software that saved me from having to open up many different computers to see what hardware was actually inside. And if you go back far enough, when software like this didn't exist, and you weren't sure what motherboard a system was using, you often physically had to get in there in order to check it out. CPU-Z is just a very simple program. You run it, it reaches out and accesses your CPU and tells you your CPU and the stats that are there. It reaches out and accesses your motherboard, tells you which motherboard model you have. It tells you which BIOS version that you have right here, so you can know whether or not you should update your BIOS. It'll also tell you your memory, your graphics card configuration, and yes, there are other pieces of software that can do this as well. I just like CPU-Z because it's very small and lightweight, and it tells you a lot of very important information about the system that you're working with. So if any of you guys do troubleshooting or anything like that, and you're not aware of this, you probably are already, but perhaps you can share with me just a bit of a shout out, a bit of a thank you to CPU-Z for answering a lot of questions about the hardware that's internally in a computer without actually having to disassemble the whole thing. Next question from Pau Velasco. He says, aside from tech, what are your favorite things to talk about? I'm gonna expand this and say, aside from tech, like what else do I fill my life with? And honestly, tech is a lot of it. Because like I said earlier, I work from home, tech just sort of interests me naturally, so I find my time for other stuff to be somewhat limited. That said, of course I do enjoy playing video games, and I like to set aside time from that if I can. I have a daughter now, her name is Hannah. She's about 6 months old, so I spend a lot of time with her, and that's awesome and fulfilling. I've always been sort of an outdoorsy person, although at this point in my life, I don't spend as much time outdoors as I would like to. I did a video a couple months back about my favorite place in the world, which is Yosemite, so I enjoy hiking and traveling and that kind of thing, again, when I can make time for it. And then I guess the only other thing that pops into mind as a hobby and something that I actually have been spending a bit of time with here and there because I've been playing for my daughter is I like to play guitar. I'm not super good at guitar or anything like that, but I did, within the past couple years, get a new guitar. This is a Taylor. Look, it's got quilted maple on the back, which is super sweet. So I do try to pull this out and just strum a few tunes here and there when I have time. Okay, 2 more questions. This is a follow-up from last month. He says, I've been using Windows 7 keys ever since Windows 10 came out, and to this day, not a single one of them has failed to activate. Last month's headline topic was, can you just use old Windows keys to activate Windows 10? Turns out you can. Turns out there was a bunch of feedback in the video of people who were like, yeah, I've been doing this for a while. So if you have a system that has Windows 10 on it and it's not activated and you want to have not that stupid watermark in the corner and stuff, just see if you can dig out some old keys, Windows 7, Windows 8, plug them in, maybe they'll work. And the final question here, because somebody asked last month if I ever grow a beard out. November probing Paul question, is your beard itchy? Or did you remember to ask about the beard product to stop it from being itchy? My beard is only just getting to the point where the itchiness has begun. I do not have any special products for it at this point. I need to talk to Heather about that, so thank you for the reminder. Yeah, this is about the halfway into the month beard that I got going on so far. I did do just a little bit of trimming around the edges. And that's pretty much it, guys. Lastly, here's my P.O. box. If you guys want to send me stuff, we typically do mail time and open up stuff during the live show that we do on Tuesdays. So thanks for that. It's also down in the video's description. And of course, if you have any questions or feedback or otherwise for me to get back to you on in next month's Probing Paul, leave those down in the comment section below. Thank you so much for your participation. Don't forget to check out my store if you want to buy some merch, some shirts, some mugs, some pint glasses. You can find those at paulshardware.net. Hit the thumbs up button on your way out if you enjoyed the video. We'll see you guys next time.